brain fog, anxiety, and exhaustion you have been carrying weren't just in your head, but signs of something your brain is begging you to heal. Tonight, on Mind Over Matter, we sit down with the brilliant Nate Pop, neurological occupational therapist and co-founder on NCX Brain Recovery. With over 20 years in the field, Nate is on a mission to demystify post-concussion syndrome and traumatic brain injuries, offering real tools and hope for people navigating symptoms long after the injury is supposed to be over. This episode is a must listen for anyone touched by brain trauma or anyone seeking to understand the hidden link between neurological healing and mental health. So, Nate, what inspired you to specialize in brain recovery, particularly post concussion and TBI therapy?
Um, yeah, well, I started working with brain recovery about 11 years ago. As an occupational therapist, I was fortunate to be invited to be on part of a team that was coming up with therapies for some cutting edge research on post concussion syndrome, which is basically someone who hits their head and has a concussion or a mild TBI, a traumatic brain injury, and their brain looks fine on a scan, but they still have symptoms. Those are people with post-concussion syndrome. And I was fortunate to be a part of a team that was uh, very cutting edge on the research. And what they were finding was that the traditional approaches of doing a little bit of therapy here and there, like an hour a week or a few hours a week, was only enough to help people deal with the problem, but it wasn't fixing the problem. In other words, it wasn't getting rid of their symptoms. And so it was really fascinating. They asked me if I could come up with approaches that would target remedial or fix it approaches to the brain, not just live with it approaches. And what their research was showing was that the brain needed many hours in a row, many days in a row of an intense program rather than the traditional every now and then an hour here, an hour there um, approach. The brain is such a creature of habit that it just was not working with all the traditional approaches were not effective. And so as we started, we had amazing success. Most of our patients were making recoveries despite the fact they had gone all over getting therapy in the traditional way, usually multiple places, and had just not had success. So that made me very interested. Because it seemed to be working. Patients were getting better in about 1 to 2 weeks. We did a 1 or 2 week program, and it was 5 to 6 hours a day, Monday through Friday, week one, and then Monday through Friday, week two. And it was very intense and focused on the areas we suspected were less active areas of the brain, because that's what happens with concussion or head injury. And their recoveries were remarkable, and that made me really excited, and eventually decided to start my own clinic. We got so busy. We were 7 months backed up, scheduling patients from out of country and out of state mostly. And so I decided to start my own clinic and focus less on the research and more on the quality of the therapy. And we've been doing that for almost 4 years now. And the passion comes from patients coming in to um, the clinic with all sorts of symptoms, and and then leaving the clinic feeling like they got their life back and most of their symptoms are resolved. And many times they're all completely resolved, 100%. So that's what kind of got me into it.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. So, was there a moment or patient story that made this work feel personal for you?
Oh, yeah. Well, we had uh, several patients. Stories were very um, compelling in terms of um, they didn't feel like there was hope. Um, when you have post-concussion syndrome, um, they call it the invisible injury sometimes because people can't see that you are now having a headache and you have brain fog and you have anxiety or depression and focus issues. It's things that people notice a little bit, but mostly they just don't know why you're not functioning the way you used to. And so it's a very lonely condition to have, and often leaves people with a very decreased quality of life. And um, just had many patients come through. One in particular was an athlete. We work with a lot of college athletes. He was a wrestler. He had had many concussions and pretty much was contemplating suicide because his headaches were, I think it was 7 out of 10 severity almost all the time. And that was just one of his many symptoms. He had brain fog and focus issues and blurry vision, intermittent blurry vision. And he just wasn't able to do anything that he normally would enjoy in life. And as a last resort, they had discovered our clinic and came, and he was able to um, engage. The first 2 days were really hard, but after several days, and then eventually by the end of the first week, most of his symptoms were better. And we have an 8-week aftercare program where we help patients also incorporate things that worked for them in the clinic into their daily lives so that they have some lifestyle changes. They build some good habits that are easy for anybody to do. They're really brain healthy things to do. And he was able to maintain his recovery, and all of his symptoms stayed away and didn't come back. And every time I see him, he's just super happy, and he's just one of our first patients after we created our own clinic, and it was really inspiring to see his life change for the better through the therapy that we do. So many cases like that, but he's one example.
It's so powerful to hear how invisible injuries can carry such weight and how your work lifts that weight gently.
Yeah.
Mhm. So, many people suffer from lingering mental health issues after concussions.
Yes.
Why are these symptoms so often misunderstood or dismissed?
Well, there is a belief that you can have a concussion and after a few days to a couple weeks, you'll get better. And so people just anticipate that that is the case. And that is the case for about 75 to 80% of the concussions. But what people don't realize generally is that about 25 to 30% of concussions have lingering symptoms that don't get better unless treated. And so people expect you to recover, first of all. If you have a concussion, they don't expect that symptoms will last. And sometimes the individual doesn't even connect that their headaches are now part of the concussion that they had that they haven't healed from. And people can't see headaches. People can't see that you're not sleeping well. People don't see that you're having a hard time retrieving words in conversation. Um, People close to you will notice some of these things, but many of these symptoms can easily go under the radar and other people don't really notice. Anxiety, depression, lack of focus. It'll look like ADHD, but it's not. Um, Apathy, just lack of motivation. Some are just irritability, really getting irritated. And what happens is people see some of what's going on, but they don't connect it to the concussion you had, a month or 2 or 3 months ago. They just think something's going on with you, but they don't just naturally connect it to that. And sometimes they just think you're being really um, angry, uh, and you're just not being nice. And they don't realize the irritability, for example, is very prevalent. And little things that didn't used to bother you will really bother you a lot if you have post-concussion syndrome. And that's just one of many symptoms that just get aggravated. Light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, some balance issues, nausea, the blurry vision, all of those things are not readily seen by others. And so that's why it's often considered an invisible injury. The person knows that they're not the same, and they'll say things like, I just do not feel like myself anymore. Everything about my life, like everything about me, is changed. And sometimes it's 20 things, and they're all a little bit changed. Some of them more than a little bit. Some are big symptoms, but sometimes you could have a little bit of 20 different symptoms, but that adds up and is very cumulative. Um, Usually they'll have a few that are even worse, but it's easy for people to overlook what's going on inside a person. Same with any mental health condition, but post-concussion syndrome is something a person has not lived with symptoms there up until that point. And now they have a myriad of symptoms and they don't know what's going on with them. And so that's why it's often misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So, what are the most common signs that someone struggling might actually be linked to a past brain injury?
Well, if you have headaches that you didn't have before, if you have brain fog, in other words, you're not you don't think very clearly. You'll often not know why you're in a room, like what you came for, what what your plan is for the day, and what's going on. You'll get kind of lost. So you have some brain fog, memory issues, short term, sometimes long term as well. You'll have to write things down more for some reason you can't remember. Um, there is balance issues sometimes, dizziness, lightheadedness, um, the emotional dysregulation stuff like depression, anxiety, um, apathy or lack of motivation, just feeling more emotional or feeling like no emotion. That can be part of it. Irritability, we mentioned, getting angry really easily. Um, Light or noise sensitivity, um, problem solving issues, concentration or focus issues. Um, Blurry vision is often like something that's prevalent or is present. Um, and it might be intermittent blurry vision where you can see clear sometimes and not at other times. And that's because your eyeballs have not changed. Your prescription, if you have glasses or contacts, has not changed. But the muscles on the outside of your eyeball, controlled by your brain, are not pointing the eyes perfectly uh, at the image that you're looking at, and that'll create a blurry image. Sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it gets it wrong, and that's why it's intermittent blurry vision often. Um, you could also have um, word retrieval issues where you're in conversation and you just can't think of the words to say like you used to, and you've noticed that socially it's harder for you to interact with people. Um, and let's see, there's sometimes you can have sensitivity to smell even. Um, there's a number of other things. The brain controls so much. It's easy to um, have some unique ones as well. Oh, sleep issues. I didn't mention sleep. Either sleeping more than normal or much less than normal, or can't fall asleep or can't stay asleep, or when you wake up, you don't feel like you got any sleep or got enough quality sleep, or drowsiness during the day, even. So there's a lot of sleep related issues sometimes as well. Mental fatigue, physical fatigue. Um, so there's quite a list. That's most of them. But if someone has, only half of those symptoms, you can see that's still quite a few. And we always look at the severity of the symptom. Like, is it a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6? We do a 0 to 6 scale, and the 5s and 6s are kind of severe symptoms, more significant. And that's how we figure out how bad it is. And then we can gauge, do you need 1 week of therapy or 2 weeks of intense therapy? That sort of thing.
That insight is a game changer, especially for people who have been misdiagnosed or just told to push through it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your multisensory integration therapy. What is it and how does it help the brain rewire and recover?
Well, traditional therapies also have mistakenly focused on uh, very limited stimulation of one area of the brain. For example, if you go to physical therapy, you're going to be focused on balance and body movement. They're focused on strengthening and range of motion and those types of things. Um, but you often aren't being challenged with auditory verbal processing or with a lot of visual motor processing, like tracking a ball or and so what happens if you go to your specific therapy, say it's speech therapy, and all you're doing is sitting in a chair and you're interacting verbally, that's great for speech, but you're not getting crossover of both neural pathways for other processing areas of the brain. So instead of just doing visual, like if you went to vision therapy, you would just focus on the visual stuff, or speech, which would focus on speech, or physical therapy, etc. We do multisensory activities, which are more whole brain activities where you are balancing, for example, and moving your body, thinking about, what you're doing with your body at the same time that we're making you track something visually and converge and diverge on something like a ball being thrown back and forth. Um, at the same time that we're playing word games or engaged in thought provoking conversation where you have to think about what you're listening to and what you're saying. And so you're doing all of those things simultaneously, and it forces the brain to work together. And all of the different areas have to coordinate and integrate. And it's hard for an imbalanced brain to remain imbalanced when you're making the whole brain work at the same time. So multisensory integration is meant to take all of the therapies or many of the therapies and many of the major processing areas of the brain and make them work together at the same time. And that heals a lot of imbalance in the brain, which is in particularly very helpful with post-concussion syndrome or any head injury or traumatic brain injury. But it's also, we found, helpful for other conditions. There's not a lot of intense therapies out there for any of the mental health issues or any of the brain-related issues. So we've had a lot of patients who have had strokes. We've had patients with depression or anxiety. We've had a lot of different diagnoses come through the clinic and also see really good recoveries. So the brain works better when it's balanced, and multisensory integration activities help the brain to restore that balance.
That's amazing. So, have you seen any breakthroughs that felt almost miraculous through this approach?
Every day. Yeah, we it's what we do, and the reason we do what we do is it's what works. We just have come to expect that patients are going to um, regain their abilities and get rid of their symptoms because it's all connected to the imbalances of a brain that has been injured. When you have a head injury, parts of your brain start receiving less blood to certain parts, and your brain recognizes the need to compensate and will engage or activate other areas not to do designed to do those tasks, but they will compensate for the areas that are not being as active as they should be. So you have less blood going to certain areas and more blood going to other areas. It's called neurovascular coupling is the technical scientific word, but there's blood flow that goes to neurons and to parts of the brain and to neural pathways. All of that changes when you hit your head or have a concussion. Most changes right back within days to weeks, and you don't need any therapy. But about 20 to 30% have lingering symptoms, and those are the ones that the brain was not able to figure out how to restore the blood flow imbalances. And so every day we're working with patients and we know they have all these symptoms. They're usually skeptical, like, we don't know if this can be fixed. I've had it for years, sometimes. And we just smile and say, don't worry, just keep working, do everything that we ask you to. We're very confident that we can improve your brain significantly. And we just come to expect it because when you do multisensory integration tasks, the brain cannot remain in its patterns of compensation. It's too difficult for the brain to overwork some areas to compensate for other areas when you're asking the brain to do a whole brain activity and to do it many hours in a row, many days in a row. And so that seems to be the recipe for a good recovery and effective therapy.
It's inspiring to know that neuroplasticity isn't just a theory, it's transformation in action.
Yeah, it is.
So, for someone who is still suffering long after a concussion, what's one practical step they can take right now to support their healing?
Um, well, if you have symptoms after a head injury that had not resolved, and let's say it's a year or more, your brain has a habit of working the wrong way. The good news is that your brain tissue and all the parts of your brain and your neural pathways are still healthy and intact. Um, Almost everyone that has post concussion syndrome that has got an MRI to see what's going on to get their brain scanned has come back with the scan saying you're normal. Obviously, they still have symptoms, so something's wrong. But the good news is the brain is normal. It's got healthy tissue not doing its job right. It just got in a bad habit of working the wrong way. And so we just have to, at that point, um, uh, help someone. If someone is struggling right now, the easiest thing to do is to call and do a free consultation with our clinic. We give a lot of free advice and we can make it more specific to what you're going through. But if you're looking for general suggestions for someone, um, anytime you can get outside versus inside, your brain has to process more information and do it at the same time. For example, if you're going for a walk, I love going for a walk outside where your vision can be drawn to the horizon. Could be the mountains or something on the horizon, to some closer objects like buildings or trees, to eventually something that's really close, like someone you're talking to. And if you go for a walk and you talk, then you're engaging um, not only your vision, because you're looking at what you're seeing as you walk, but also your body movement because you're walking. If you can go on uneven terrain, like on a trail or maybe on the beach or on grass, something that's kind of uneven terrain, that makes your brain work a lot more. And then if you're engaged in conversation because you go with someone, then you're integrating verbal and auditory processing as well. So then you're doing kind of a multisensory activity at a lower level, and it might help your brain start to work together. People with post concussion syndrome sometimes don't want to do things where their brain has to do multiple things at the same time. So they want to just sit, maybe be more immobile. You want to get out of your chairs and move. They want to stay inside. You want to go outside. They don't want to look around and pay attention. They kind of go tunnel vision, but you got to make yourself look at your environment visually. And then they don't want to engage or be as social sometimes as well. You need to talk. And if you do all of those at the same time, it can be really healthy for your brain. But really, if someone wants specific advice, we're happy to do free consultations virtually, and they can also talk to an expert. And it can be more tailored to what's going on with you, and maybe could lead to us recommending you come to the clinic and that we do treatment here. It might just give you suggestions that you can do on your own.
That's such empowering information because healing starts with understanding, not just enduring.
Yeah, I agree.
Just because a wound isn't visible doesn't mean it isn't real. And thanks to Nate Pop, we now have more hope, more tools, and more clarity to navigate the healing journey ahead. If you or someone you love is struggling with brain injury or lingering concussion symptoms, share this episode. And remember, you are not alone, and healing is still possible. Until next time, stay strong, stay curious, and trust your mind to lead you back to wholeness.